Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 21, Is the Sorting Hat This Brave? After the unexpected chaos caused by the biting ball, the sorting hat quickly returned to its efficient pace, sorting the remaining students as soon as it touched their hair. With this newfound speed, they were soon down to the last two new students. Kanna Prince. The familiar name caught Kyle and Cedric's attention at once. Both of them looked over at the girl from the train. "That's the girl we saw earlier, right?" Cedric asked curiously. "Where do you think she'll end up, Slytherin?" "Probably," Kyle replied, scratching his back out of habit. "Judging by her fancy clothes, she's likely a pureblood. Slytherin makes the most sense." But then, Kyle suddenly froze. Something seemed off. Just after Professor McGonagall called Kanna's name, he noticed that Snape, who had been sitting with a bored, disinterested expression throughout the ceremony, had leaned forward, focusing on the sorting hat with unusual intensity. Wait, do they know each other? Kyle thought, a chill running down his spine. It wasn't completely impossible. Despite Snape's reclusive tendencies and his general avoidance of social gatherings, he was still a well-known figure in the wizarding world, especially as a potions master and one of Hogwarts' heads of house. He was bound to have connections, and it wouldn't be shocking if Kanna's family was among them. A sinking feeling took hold of Kyle. Could this be bad for me? If Snape really had ties to Kanna's family, and he found out that Kyle had tricked her on the train, things could get messy. Knowing Snape's personality, Kyle feared he might be in for some unpleasant protagonist treatment far sooner than he'd like. It can't be that coincidental, Kyle thought nervously, feeling the back of his neck prickle. He had just been gloating about the Weasley twins getting what they deserved, and now it seemed like retribution was already headed his way. As he anxiously watched the platform, Kyle noticed something strange. When it came time for Kanna's sorting, the usually fast sorting hat seemed to slow down, as if it had returned to its earlier indecision. The entire hall waited, and waited. A minute passed before the sorting hat finally called out. "Hufflepuff." "Huh." A wave of enthusiastic cheers erupted from the Hufflepuff table, and the prefects jumped up to welcome Kanna. Kyle, however, was left staring in confusion as she passed by him, question marks practically floating above his head. What just happened? Purebloods rarely ended up in Hufflepuff, and while it wasn't completely unheard of, after all, Newt Scamander was a famous Hufflepuff, it was still uncommon. Purebloods were typically sorted into Slytherin, and Kyle had assumed Kanna would follow that path. Could it have been because of me? Kyle dismissed the thought quickly. The sorting hat didn't play games. It had the responsibility of determining a student's best path, one that would influence their future. No matter how young or naive Kanna might be, the hat wouldn't let her personal whims affect its judgment. Otherwise, her family wouldn't take it lightly. Kyle recalled something his father, Chris, had once told him. When Sirius Black was sorted into Gryffindor instead of Slytherin, the Black Matron had thrown a fit at Hogwarts. If it weren't for Dumbledore stepping in, the sorting hat might have been destroyed by fiendfire. The incident had caused quite a stir, and for a time, there were serious discussions within the Ministry of Magic about replacing the sorting hat with a different method for sorting students. The idea had even garnered a surprising level of support. Many pureblood families, especially the most traditionalist ones, didn't want their children sorted anywhere but Slytherin. For them, having a Gryffindor, or any other house, member in the family was a mark of disgrace. Of course, the proposal never went through. Dumbledore, who had been far less lenient back then, had firmly opposed it, and pureblood families were too intimidated to challenge his authority. The matter had been dropped, but since that time, no member of the pureblood families involved had been sorted anywhere but Slytherin. Kyle couldn't resist a glance toward the teacher's table to gauge Snape's reaction. If Snape had a connection to Kanna's family, it would be easy to tell by his response to her sorting. Well, Kyle was wrong. Snape's face was as dark as a storm cloud, and he looked as if he might start dripping with rage at any moment. He was deep in conversation with Dumbledore, occasionally glancing over at the Hufflepuff table, where Kanna had just taken her seat. Kyle quickly lowered his head, trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. Could the Sorting Hat really be that bold? His heart pounded a little faster. Meanwhile, the final new student had been sorted and took their place at the Gryffindor table. Dumbledore stood up, smiling warmly at the students, and spread his arms wide. "Welcome, welcome to another new year at Hogwarts. There's nothing more delightful than seeing you all here once again. What are you waiting for? Eat." At once, the empty tables before them filled with steaming dishes. Mountains of beef, roast chicken, pork chops, sausages, and steaks appeared, along with boiled potatoes, pea shoots, and French fries for those who preferred something lighter. The smell of the feast filled the air, making everyone's appetite grow. Kyle shook his head, trying to push all the Snape-Kanna worries out of his mind. Forget it, he thought. What's done is done, what's the use of overthinking it? Whatever came next, he wouldn't be the first to suffer. The Sorting Hat was the one who made the final call, after all. And if Snape really wanted to make his life difficult, it wouldn't last forever. Once Harry Potter enrolls next year, Snape won't care about me anymore, Kyle reassured himself. He pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the meal, reaching for a fried chicken leg and biting into it. The skin was perfectly crispy, the meat tender and juicy, filling his mouth with a burst of flavor. The baked potatoes were equally delicious, simple but perfectly cooked. He liked that there wasn't too much seasoning, allowing the natural flavor of the potatoes to shine. For an extra kick, he added some black pepper and ketchup from the side and found the combination surprisingly good. He reached for another potato, ready to enjoy it in peace. But just as Kyle cut into the potato, Cedric leaned over, lowering his voice. "Have you noticed that she keeps staring at you?" "Staring at me? Who?" Kyle asked, not looking up as he reached for the black pepper. "Kanna Prince, the girl from the train," Cedric said, raising an eyebrow and pointing mockingly across the table. "Look, she's doing it again." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 22, Poor Choice of Friends. Kyle glanced up, following Cedric's finger, and was surprised to find Kanna sitting diagonally across from him on his left, focused on cutting into a steak. However, every time she made a slice, her eyes flicked up to meet his, as if her plate held not a steak, but Kyle himself. The sight made Kyle grit his teeth in discomfort. "Wait a minute," Cedric said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Her eyes don't look too friendly. She wasn't like this on the train, right?" He thought for a moment before adding, "I remember all the new students were together before the division. Did something happen between you two?" "Yeah, it's weird," Kyle agreed with a shrug, giving a quick summary of the incident. By the end, Cedric was speechless, a stunned expression on his face. "An Avada Kedavra to sort us into houses? Seriously, who would even think of that? Did she actually believe it?" Cedric asked cautiously. Kyle sighed bitterly. "What do you think? If she didn't, do you think she'd be staring at me like that?" "Ha! Someone bold enough to make up such a story, and someone bold enough to believe it." Cedric couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. He blinked in disbelief, looking back and forth between Kanna and Kyle before giving a thumbs up. "Wow, Kyle. You two are perfect for each other." Kyle's patience wore thin. "I'm only 11, okay? You want me thrown into Azkaban or something," he retorted. "And by the way, don't say things like that again. If Professor Snape hears you, you're done for." "Wait, she knows Snape?" Cedric asked, eyebrows raised. Kyle nodded. "I'm not sure, but it seems like she does." Cedric's expression shifted instantly. He stared at Kyle with a newfound look of disdain. That's just low. How could you pull such a nasty prank on a first year? If I were the prefect, I'd dock your points for sure. Kyle gaped at him, utterly stunned. He had switched sides the moment he heard Conna and Snape might be connected, and the speed of his change in attitude was astonishing. Was this really the Cedric he knew? But Cedric stayed stone-faced under Kyle's gaze, even scooting slightly away from him, as if he didn't want to be associated with whatever trouble Kyle had stirred up. Kyle could only respond with a silent middle finger, frustrated. Wrong friend, he thought. When did Cedric get so shameless? But the tense atmosphere made it impossible to focus on the food. Kyle eventually set his knife and fork down, his attention fully on Conna. The little witch didn't avoid his stare. They locked eyes, neither one willing to back down. Her round face puffed up, but it was unclear whether it was from the steak she was chewing or from the anger boiling beneath her calm exterior. They sat there, silent and unmoving, as if the school banquet had become their personal battlefield, each refusing to lose the unspoken challenge of who would look away first. At first, both were resolute, determined to keep up this silent duel indefinitely. But Conna had clearly overestimated her stamina. It wasn't long before her confidence began to falter. Her gaze shifted ever so slightly, and a pink blush spread across her once pale face. As seconds ticked by, her eyes darted nervously, her breath quickened, and her entire face turned crimson. In the end, she couldn't hold out any longer. With a swift motion, she dropped her head, her nose nearly touching the steak on her plate, as though she wished she could disappear into it. All that was visible were her two bright red ears. Conna's personality hadn't changed at all. She was still just as shy and socially anxious as before. Her intense expression earlier had only been a result of the anger and embarrassment she felt after realizing she'd been tricked. It was similar to how a normally quiet and calm girl might curse at the keyboard after being cheated in her favorite game, same principle. Kyle had been avoiding her, which only made things worse. She had bottled up her frustration with nowhere to release it, allowing the tension to simmer until now. Once her anger began to fade, she quickly reverted back to her usual self, the shy, socially awkward little witch she'd always been. Kyle's eye contact had inadvertently provided her an outlet, though not a very effective one. After all, locking eyes with someone is a form of communication, even if it's a silent, indirect way of venting. What surprised Kyle, though, was how fast her anger dissipated. Within just a few minutes, she was back to her old self. Her personality was just that mild. Kyle thought about it. Ginny Weasley was already considered pretty easygoing compared to the people he knew, but even when she was angry, she'd at least confront him and argue for a good half hour. Conna, on the other hand, was far too meek. Her kind nature, while admirable, wasn't necessarily a good thing in the wizarding world. At Hogwarts, it wasn't such a big deal. Hufflepuff was known for its honesty and friendliness. No one in their house would exploit someone for being too nice. But once they graduated, Conna's soft nature could become a liability. Out in the real world, especially among darker forces, such traits could be dangerous. Kyle couldn't help but think about the grim realities beyond Hogwarts. Grogan Stump, a famous minister of magic, once said that Hogwarts was a fairy tale, but outside its walls was an abyss where people waited to devour you. For dark wizards on the edge of ruin, a shy, introverted witch from a pure-blood family was like a walking golden carrot. They would swarm like hyenas, eager to strip her to the bone. Kyle wasn't exaggerating. There were precedents, particularly during the chaotic period after Voldemort's defeat. With the Dark Lord gone, his followers, the Death Eaters, lost their protection and were hunted by the Ministry's horrors. In their desperation, they went into hiding, leaving a vacuum that predatory wizards quickly filled. These opportunists targeted the pure-blood families in disarray, robbing them or using the Cruciatus curse to extract secrets. For them, any pure-blood wizard traveling alone was easy prey. They didn't care how prestigious or powerful a family was, nor did they worry about future reprisals. As long as there was profit to be made, and as long as the family wasn't protected by someone like Dumbledore or Voldemort, they would pounce, tearing chunks out of whatever remained. Many pure-blood wizards fell during that time, leading to the decline and eventual disappearance of several families. This dark period only ended when most of the Death Eaters were captured, and the Ministry's focus shifted toward dismantling these predators. But the threat was always there, lurking, waiting for another moment of weakness. Kyle glanced at Conna, who was now pretending not to see him. After a moment's pause, he reached for the black pepper, sprinkled it over the diced potatoes on his plate, and took a bite. Forget it, he thought. It's only the first year. There's still a long way to go before graduation. No point worrying about things like that now. Better to just eat and fill up. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 23, A Wild Bunch. Half an hour later, the banquet was winding down, and the main dishes had been replaced with an array of tempting desserts. Kyle, after surveying the options, picked a serving of maple pudding. Bill and Charlie had raved about this particular dessert, insisting that nowhere else could replicate its authentic taste quite like Hogwarts. Kyle took a bite and immediately understood the hype. The sweetness was perfectly balanced, the fragrance rich and inviting, and there was just the right hint of acidity to round it all out. It was the ideal way to finish off the meal. As the last bites were savored and the remaining desserts cleared away, the long tables returned to their spotless state. The great hall grew quiet as Dumbledore stood up, signaling that it was time for his traditional speech. Now, he began, his voice commanding immediate attention. I trust you are all sufficiently full, but before you go to your dormitories, I have a few words to say. The hall was silent, every student now focused on the headmaster. First-year students, please note that the forest area on the school grounds is off-limits to all students, Dumbledore said, his tone serious. And he paused briefly before continuing. Professor McGonagall has asked me to remind you that the use of magic in the corridors or any public area will not be tolerated and will be severely punished. As soon as he finished, nearly half the room instinctively turned to look at Fred and George Weasley, the infamous Gryffindor twins. Far from looking abashed, the twins stood up and began bowing theatrically to their peers, their grins wide as though Dumbledore had just honored them. Professor McGonagall, on the other hand, looked as though she was barely holding back her fury. Her lips were pursed so tightly they had nearly disappeared. Kyle had little doubt the twins would be in for some serious detention, and it certainly wouldn't be a short stint. Dumbledore remained unfazed by the twins' antics and smoothly continued, the Quidditch tryouts will be held during the second week of the term. Any second-year students or above who are interested in playing for their house team should contact Madam Hooch. As expected, Kyle thought. He had already known that first-year students wouldn't be allowed to try out for the Quidditch teams, so he wasn't surprised by Dumbledore's words. The restriction wasn't entirely rigid, though, after all, exceptions could be made for extraordinary talent, like what would happen with Harry Potter a year later. The rule was primarily there to level the playing field for Muggle-born students, who had never been exposed to Quidditch before attending Hogwarts. After a year, they'd be more familiar with the wizarding world, and it would be a fairer time for team selection. Kyle, however, wasn't planning to wait a whole year. He was determined to speak to Professor Sprout in a few days and see if she might allow him to join the tryouts with the second years. The thought of not being able to fly for an entire year felt like torture. Quiet, please. Dumbledore's voice rose slightly to regain control over the excited murmurings about Quidditch that had erupted among the students. Finally, I am pleased to introduce you to our new Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. Dumbledore gestured to the staff table with a welcoming smile, directing attention to the figure seated there. Professor Oren, say hello to everyone, Dumbledore announced warmly. The man seated next to Snape, a rather plain-looking, middle-aged wizard, stood up with a polite smile and waved to the students. The response was underwhelming. Aside from the first-year students who clapped a bit more enthusiastically, the rest of the hall only offered scattered, half-hearted applause. For the older students, the excitement of a new defense against the dark arts professor had long worn off. He's just another professor, Kyle thought to himself, he'll be gone by next year like all the others. No need to get too excited, just clap for Dumbledore's sake. Professor Oren didn't seem bothered by the lackluster reception, as if he had expected it. After giving his brief greeting, he sat back down. However, as he shifted his chair, it slid a little too far. His elbow accidentally jabbed into Snape's lower back. "Sh!" Snape hissed, gripping the armrests of his chair tightly to stifle a cry of pain. Oren immediately turned to him, concern evident in his voice. "I'm sorry, Severus. Are you all right? Do you need to see Madame Pomfrey?" "I don't believe we're on a first-name basis, Professor Oren," Snape responded icily, clearly irritated. "And no, I don't need the hospital wing for a mere bump. Save your energy." Snape moved his chair further away, his expression revealing his disgust, as if Oren were an unpleasant sight, like a flobberworm drained of its slime and rendered useless. Professor Oren looked a bit embarrassed and opened his mouth as though to say something more, but Dumbledore had already moved on, discussing the rules about Hogsmeade Village. Soon, he transitioned to leading the students in the school song. A long golden ribbon floated above the hall, and soon the students began singing, each to their own melody. The hall filled with a chaotic mix of different tunes, transforming the school song into a medley of competing sounds. The most popular tunes included "Do the Hippogriff" and "Symphony of Fate," which many of the young wizards favored. Kyle, however, opted to sing it to the tune of "The Wide and Broad Aisle." But no one was enjoying it more than Fred and George Weasley. Arm in arm, they belted out the song to the tune of "Flight of the Bumblebee," while dancing energetically, creating a joyful scene that soon caught the attention of other Gryffindors. Before long, many students joined in, turning what was supposed to be a solemn school song into a spontaneous, lively dance party. Even Dumbledore, standing on the stage, couldn't resist moving to the beat for a moment, a smile lighting up his face. When the song finally ended, the entire hall burst into applause, with the loudest cheers going to Fred and George. Dumbledore, still adjusting his crooked wizard's hat, chuckled and said, "That was beautiful. That's what school songs are for. Now," he continued, "it's time for bed. Everyone, back to your dormitories." The banquet came to an end, and students began rushing toward the doors of the Great Hall. The prefects quickly sprang into action, trying to round up the first-year students. "First-year students, over here," one called out. "Don't push, let the first-years through. Freshmen, hurry up, we need to get moving. Is everyone here? Remember to follow me closely and don't fall behind." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 24, Not Even a Krupp Would Want This. Hufflepuff's common room was nestled deep within the underground passages of Hogwarts Castle. The entrance, cleverly hidden in a pile of large barrels located in the kitchen corridor's right-hand corner, was both inconspicuous and charming in its simplicity. Gaining entry was straightforward. Students had to follow the rhythm of Helga Hufflepuff's name, tapping the bottom of the second barrel in the second row. The lid would then rotate, revealing a passageway leading into the cozy common room. Unlike the other houses, which relied on frequently changing passwords or riddles, Hufflepuff had the most practical system. Their fixed entrance sequence meant once you learned it, you were set for all 7 years. No need to worry about keeping up with new passwords every week, which was certainly a relief for many students. Remember, it's Helga Hufflepuff. The order must be exact. Hufflepuff's prefect, Harris, reminded the cluster of nervous first-years, slowing down the demonstration to ensure they memorized it correctly. A small boy in the crowd raised his hand, his voice quivering with anxiety. "What if I get it wrong? I'm not good at remembering things. Will I be stuck outside the dormitory?" Harris smiled reassuringly but walked over to the barrel, ready to make a point. "It's worse than that." He tapped the barrel twice, deliberately wrong, and quickly stepped back. In an instant, a torrent of sour-smelling vinegar sprayed from the neighboring barrel, drenching the space where he had stood just moments before. "As you can see," Harris said, waving his wand to clean up the mess. If you get the sequence wrong, the other lid bursts open, and you'll be covered in vinegar. If you don't want to smell like a vinegar bottle for the rest of the day, I suggest you practice. It's not that hard once you get the hang of it. The group chuckled nervously, but the message was clear. Harris ran through the correct sequence a couple more times, ensuring everyone understood before leading them through the now open passage into the common room. At the end of the tunnel, the new students were greeted by a large, circular room that exuded warmth and simplicity. This was the Hufflepuff common room. The low ceiling, only about 3 meters high, made the space feel intimate, while the cozy black and yellow armchairs scattered around the room invited relaxation. The walls were alive with a variety of fascinating plants, adding a touch of nature to the underground setting. Kyle's eyes scanned the room with interest. Beyond the usual decorative plants, he spotted several rare species that he knew were valuable. He recognized a rue plant, didn't he, and even the prized hydrangea. His gaze then fell on the most striking plant of all, a wind chime sunflower placed right in the center of the lounge. If I'm not mistaken, Kyle thought, that wind chime sunflower alone is worth about 300 galleons. Beside it stood the golden hydrangea, slightly less expensive but still a luxurious 279 galleons at Diagon Alley. It was clear to Kyle that Professor Sprout, renowned in the wizarding world for her expertise in herbology, had hand-picked these plants for the common room. The subtle display of rare and valuable plants, arranged with casual elegance, reflected a certain low-key luxury. Kyle suppressed the temptation to snatch one of the prized plants, turning away with effort. His attention shifted to a large honey-colored wooden mantelpiece, carved intricately with badgers, the Hufflepuff house emblem. On it sat several jars, which, according to head boy Harris, were filled with various snacks, sweets and treats that the students could enjoy at their leisure. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of Helga Hufflepuff herself. She was depicted as a kind-faced witch, holding a golden cup and smiling warmly down at the students. The cheerful expression of their house founder added to the comforting and welcoming atmosphere of the common room, making it feel like a true home for Hufflepuff students. At that moment, more Hufflepuff students began entering the common room one by one. They greeted the new students warmly and offered them small snacks as gifts. Kyle received quite a bit, and his robe pockets were soon stuffed with colorful candies and preserves, enough to last him more than a month. What do you think? Pretty cozy, isn't it? Cedric approached Kyle, giving him a friendly pat on the shoulder. No other house has such a comfortable environment. Oh, it's you, Mr. Diggory, Kyle replied, clearly unimpressed, as he brushed Cedric's hand off his shoulder. What, not worried about being misunderstood by Professor Snape at a time like this? Come on, Kyle, that's just for show, Cedric responded with a smirk. Our friendship is unbreakable, I swear. Kyle found Cedric's explanation even more irritating and quickly stepped away from him, though he knew Cedric was only teasing. He wasn't truly angry, just annoyed by the remark. Besides, Cedric had said it was all for appearances. Did he really think he was Harry Potter, constantly catching Snape's attention? What was going on in his head? Kyle shrugged it off. He couldn't shake the feeling that Cedric's behavior seemed oddly familiar, particularly the way he deflected blame so smoothly. He had definitely seen that style before. But who was it? Kyle racked his brain, but couldn't pinpoint the person. Finally, he gave up, figuring it was probably, maybe, the Weasley brothers. As the common room filled with more people, Harris, one of the prefects, gestured for the newcomers to sit on the sofas. He explained that the professors had asked him to inform the first years about Hogwarts rules and help everyone get to know each other. He and the other female prefects soon returned from the nearby kitchen, carrying biscuits and large glasses of fresh juice. This was one of the perks of Hufflepuff being so close to the kitchens, something the other houses didn't enjoy. Soon, the tables in the common room were piled high with all kinds of snacks. Welcome to Hufflepuff, Harris said cheerfully. There aren't too many rules at Hogwarts, but make sure to remember the following. While Harris spoke, Kyle scanned the room and spotted Conna sitting on the outer edge of the crowd. Without drawing attention, he moved over to her. "I was out of line earlier," Kyle whispered, "I'm sorry." Conna looked startled. When she realized it was Kyle, she whispered back, "No, it's okay. It was partly my fault too. I'm so dumb, I should have guessed you were joking. There's no way Hogwarts uses spells like that to sort students." Kyle shook his head, his expression serious. "It's not the same. A joke is only funny if both people find it funny. I was definitely wrong for scaring you like that, so I needed to apologize." Seeing how earnest Kyle was, Conna bit her lip, then looked up and said sincerely, "All right, I accept your apology." After saying that, she gave him a light slap on the arm. "Now we're even." As for the force of that slap, it was barely enough to knock off any dust. "Not quite, just a second." Kyle smiled and took out a handful of the prettiest brown-wrapped candies from his pocket. Handing them to her, he said, "This is your compensation. We're only even if you accept them." "Well, okay." Conna accepted the candies, popped one in her mouth in front of Kyle, and then extended her hand with the remaining ones toward him, smiling. "Here, I'll buy you a candy." "No, no," Kyle quickly shook his head, mumbling, "Who in their right mind eats licorice snap? Not even a Krupp would eat this stuff." Crunch. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 25, Roommates. In short, these are the main things you need to keep in mind. As long as you pay attention to them in your daily life, you won't lose house points. But even if you do lose points once in a while due to negligence, it's no big deal. Here in Hufflepuff, we don't worry too much about that. The most important thing is that everyone enjoys their time at Hogwarts. Head boy Harris was speaking confidently to the group, while Kyle sat at the very edge, silent with his head down. "Kyle, what are you doing here? I've been looking for you everywhere." Cedric approached and casually handed Kyle a glass of juice. Fresh orange juice, definitely a good choice before bed. Kyle didn't take it, nor did he lift his head. He just waved Cedric off to show he didn't want it. "What's wrong? Are you not feeling well?" Cedric asked, his voice tinged with concern. "No, I'm just feeling a little sleepy," Kyle responded hastily, still avoiding eye contact. "I don't like drinking anything before bed. You can offer it to someone else." This odd behavior only heightened Cedric's curiosity. He took a step to the left, trying to get a better look at Kyle's face. But Kyle turned away at the same time, dodging him. Something was definitely off. "All right, I'll ask some of the other first years then," Cedric said, pretending to walk away. But instead, he moved lightly, circling around and then quickly dropping to the ground near Kyle. Kyle, lost in his thoughts about when he could return to the dormitory, suddenly found himself face to face with a furry head appearing right in front of him. Their eyes met. "Kyle, what happened to your eye? Why do you have such a huge black eye?" "Nothing." Kyle immediately raised his hand to cover his left eye and answered seriously, "I just accidentally hit the table. It's perfectly normal to have bruises from something like that. How do you end up with a bruise that round?" Cedric sat down, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "It looks more like you got punched." "No way, you're imagining things." Kyle shot back. "Even if you don't believe me, surely you believe in Hufflepuff. This is the warmest house at Hogwarts. How could there be anyone violent here?" "You're right, could it really just be a bruise?" Cedric nodded, partially convinced. He didn't think anyone from Hufflepuff would punch a first year on their first day of school either, that was more of a Slytherin thing. But still, it puzzled him. If Kyle had simply fallen, how could his black eye be so perfectly round? Was he exceptionally clumsy? As Cedric pondered this mystery, Harris finished his speech. "From today onwards, we're all classmates. If you need help, don't hesitate to ask. Hufflepuff is one big, warm family, and every upperclassman, myself included, will support you. Now, you all must be tired, so I'll take you to your dormitories. Patty, you'll handle the girls. Kyle sprang to his feet as if he'd been released from a burden and followed the rest of the group without so much as a goodbye to Cedric. Under Harris's guidance, Kyle soon arrived at his dormitory. Like the common room, the dormitory was dominated by warm yellow and black tones. Copper lamps cast a cozy glow over the room's four-poster beds, while brass bed warmers hung on the walls, ensuring each bed remained at the perfect temperature. There were two other boys in his dormitory. One, Mikkel Derrick, was a small, dark-haired boy. The other, Ryan Baggins, was stockier with blonde hair. Neither of them were particularly remarkable, just two fellow students. The last bed in the room was empty, likely because there weren't enough new students. Kyle tilted his head, gave the boys a brief greeting, then climbed into bed without further conversation. "Hey, this is amazing, isn't it? I'm a wizard," Mikkel exclaimed, sitting on the edge of his bed, beaming with excitement. "No one in my family can do magic. My dad sells drilling rigs, and my mum works in a bank, so when I first got the letter, I thought it was a joke." "Ha, Hogwarts. I still can't believe it. I'm half and half, what wizards call half-blood," Ryan chimed in, running a hand through his blonde hair. "My dad's a wizard, but my mum's a muggle." She was completely shocked when she found out. Of course she was. Anyone who hasn't had contact with magic would be, Mikkel agreed. "You wouldn't believe it, when the professor came to our house, my parents almost called the police. He just appeared in front of us and started talking about some kind of displacement. Locomotor? Apparition," Kyle corrected quietly from his bed. "Yeah, that's it, apparition," Mikkel said, looking over at Kyle with sudden recognition. "Hey, I remember you. You're Kyle Chopper, the one whose sorting took 20 minutes, right?" "That's right," Kyle nodded. "Nice to meet you both. So, what happened?" Mikkel asked curiously, leaning in. "Why did your sorting take so long, longer than all the other first years combined?" "It's nothing," Kyle said after a brief pause. "The sorting hat just couldn't decide where to send me, that's all. It was torn." "I see," Mikkel said with awe. "For the hat to take that long, you must be really talented." Kyle smiled but didn't respond. He was talented, sure, but that had little to do with the sorting hat's dilemma. If Mikkel knew the real reason for its hesitation, he probably wouldn't have been so impressed. For the next several minutes, Mikkel kept up a stream of enthusiastic chatter. He jumped from talking about his first visit to Diagon Alley to Gringotts, and then from Gringotts to choosing a wand, barely pausing for breath in between. It was clear that becoming a wizard had made him incredibly happy. At first, Kyle and Ryan managed to join in here and there, but eventually, the only voice in the dormitory was Michael's. The other two just couldn't keep up. After a long day of travel and excitement, exhaustion had finally caught up with them. Kyle wanted to keep talking with his new roommates and get to know them better, but the bed was so comfortable that he fell asleep without even realizing it. Next to him, Ryan had drifted off even faster and hadn't stirred for the past 5 minutes. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.